Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Just the Facts Town Hall virtual edition brought to you by Talk About It America. My name is Amy, and I'm going to be one of the co presenters for this presentation today. I'm a mom, an activist, an advocate, a bill writer, a former House candidate, and I am so excited to be here with you.
And my name is Tonya, and I am also an advocate and an organizer, and I have also been a teacher for the last 18 years.
This event is hosted by Talk About It America. It's a nonpartisan group committed to clearing the noise and creating real conversations around the kinds of bills that shape our lives. The big, the complicated, controversial, and essential ones just like this. Now, if you're looking at the screen and you are confused about the One Big Beautiful Bill, aka the OBBB, which does sound like a Broadway musical, it's actually a piece of federal legislation with very real impacts. And so we wanted to break it down. Tonya and I created this slideshow, and it doesn't touch on everything, but it does touch on some of the biggest aspects of it. Now, as of today, as of June 25th at 7:23 p.m., this is current. However, everything is still going through the Senate at this time, so things could change in terms of what has been removed due to the Byrd Rule and what provisions are still being challenged. So, before we jump in, sometimes policy can remind us of being a kid with a juice box. You ask for orange, they hand you apple, and you say, "Hey, this isn't what I asked for." And they say, "Well, technically it's fruit." And that is how some parts of this bill might feel for you, regardless of party. So, tonight we are here to figure out what's actually in the juice box. So, we are going to present the One Big Beautiful Bill in a nonpartisan manner that is accessible for everyone. So before we move on, we just wanted to make sure that that was there. I'm not going to go through any of the regular housekeeping stuff that we would for a live event. I'm so sorry you missed it. It was great. We had a lot of live panelists and a lot of great conversations, but hopefully you will be satisfied with the slideshow. If not, let us know and we'll re-record. And with that, I guess Tonya, let's take it away. Let's go ahead and start.
Let's do this.
All right, so let's start with the One Big Beautiful Bill and what in the world it is. No, it's not a boy band group or a Broadway musical. I know I made that joke before, and I'm still holding to it. The One Big Beautiful Bill is a 1,118-page bill that is comprised of 32 separate bills. It is endorsed by President Trump, and it passed in the House with only Republican votes. So I also want to point out that you'll see it on the screen. It only passed by one vote, one singular vote. So, and the vote was had at 1 a.m. So it was not done in clear daylight. It was done overnight, and we woke up in the morning to find the results of this bill. Now,